technical catches.
Good evening. The commission is just coming out of executive session. I'll do roll call first, Shelley.
Gehrig.
Here.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Here.
Strand.
Here.
Mahoney.
Here. And we have a motion that's come out of executive session. Commissioner Strand?
Yes, Mayor, I would move that the Fargo City Commission further discuss in executive session the details of the issue, the details of the memorandum proposal to the airport authority after they've had their October meeting and responded to our proposal,
October 22nd.
October 22nd. So I move that we go back into executive session after we've heard back from them relative to our proposed memorandum.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I don't think it's intended, but just for the media particularly to know that we'll still need a motion at the time we do that to go into executive session. We're not suggesting that we can move into it without the normal process, but just with that clarification.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Strand.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Mahoney.
Aye. So we will start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
And tonight we have a special treat. We're going to have Sharon Whitebear come up before us. We have the North Dakota Tribal Nation flags. We have all five up here? Yep, we have all five. And we're the second one in the state to have it. The capital has it, we have it, and it's Grand Forks also have it.
Good evening, Mayor Mahoney. Grand Forks was the first city to accept the flags, and then Fargo was the second, and the capital was the third to accept the
good.
flags.
So why don't you explain to the public what's going on, Sharon? We appreciate that. And you're the chairperson of the Native American Commission still?
That's right, I am.
You had a great powwow over the weekend, I heard.
It
So
was excellent, the Crossroads powwow. There was a lot of people involved doing that, and it was excellent. Thank you for all the volunteers that were there and helped with that, too.
you're welcome.
Well, Mayor Mahoney, city commissioners, and the viewing audience, the people here in the chambers today. Well, there's several tribes that represented in this community. Each of these flags here represents one of the 5 federally recognized tribal flag nations within North Dakota. And last year, Mayor Mahoney accepted these flags on October 8th, 2018, as part of a community 3rd annual Indigenous Peoples Day recognition. And so at this time, I'll have a representative from each tribe explain what the each flag is representing. So the first one that we have is Joe.
Mayor Mahoney, commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Joe Williams. I'm a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate and a resident here in Fargo. The blue flag of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, as you can see up here, is representative of 2 bands of the Asante people, the Sisseton people and the Wahpeton bands. And we have, actually we have 2 different versions of the flag here. The first, what you see here is the first version, the Sioux tribe flag. This was an earlier version, and this, the Oyate, the people had changed the flag to the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate flag later on. The term Sioux is a Chippewa and French term, which means snake, which implies they're not trustworthy. And the Oyate decided they didn't want to have an untrustworthy title on their flag, so they changed it to Oyate. And it just means people are banned or Dakota Nation. The graphic that you see up there is the blue triangle. It represents the boundaries of the Lake Travis Reservation, which was established in 1867. The 7 red teepees up there are representatives of the 7 districts within the boundaries of the reservation. Those are Long Hollow, Old Agency, Big Coulee, Enemy Swim, Hayupa, Buffalo Lake, and Lake Traverse. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the next flag we'll have is the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation.
Good afternoon. My name is James Moran. I'm a member of the three affiliated tribes, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and the Rikara. The images of the men on the flag is the historic leadership of the nation. Here it shows chief of each tribe. The Mandan, the hand on the chest, is Chief Forebears. The middle one is Hidatsa chief, and that's 2 ravens. And then a gentleman on the right side is a Rikara, and his name is Son of Star. On the outer edge of the circle, it shows the nations of 3 affiliated tribes was established by Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And then the next one we have is the Spirit Lake tribe.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lenore King, and I am an enrolled member from the System Wapaton Oyate, but I am going to represent the Spirit Lake flag here. And this flag has 4 teepees representing the 4 districts of the Spirit Lake Reservation. And with their names written out in the yellow ring in the inner white circle, the 1867 treaty is depicted blank, representing the promises that were made to the Indian people by the U.S. government. And the peace pipe represents the Dakota chiefs' ways of honoring their word when they sign their treaties. The sword and war bonnet there represent peace agreements between the United States Army and the Dakota warriors. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next one we'll have is from the Turtle Mountains. Anna.
Hello, my name is Anna Johnson. I'm from the Turtle Mountains. I'm an enrolled member, and I'm also one of the commissioners on the Native Commission. This flag shows Chief Littleshell with a pipe and a hatchet, symbolizing peace and defense. The Red River cart represents the Métis. The 4 teepees represent the reservation's 4 districts. It also shows the sacred circle with the 4 directions, and the turtle with yellow, red, black, and white. Written in black text are also the teachings of the 7 grandfathers: wisdom, love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully our commission has all those.
Say that again?
Hopefully our commission has all of those attributes.
Yes. Well, we're all sharing, so it's good. And then I will speak for the Standing Rock flag. The flag of the Standing Rock features a tribal, let's get there first. Features a tribal seal in the center, which contains a circle of 8 white teepees representing the 8 districts of the reservation: Long Soldier, Cannonball, Wakpala, Kennel, Running Antelope, Bear Soldier, Rock Creek, and Porcupine. The ring of teepees surrounds a yellow disc depicting the Standing Rock on its red pedestal. And then the next one is, oh, that's the last one. So you have all representing all the 5 tribes here. Right now, in honor of these flags, we'd like to have a representative, Guy Fox, who's also on the commission, give us a flag song and then this time I would ask you to stand, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a little bit about the song. During World War II, two Arikara soldiers were standing guard at two separate foxholes. When they heard the sound of the wind, that brought a melody to each one of them. When they returned home, they came together to hear that they had both heard this song. And so some of the other men there in the tribe helped them to create the words to this and brought the song. This song is seen or used all over the world in the United States by many tribes as their flag song as well. So we're pretty proud of that. So in closing, commissioners, we are honored to present our tribal flags to the city of Fargo today. It demonstrates a willingness of our city and tribal governments to work together. These 5 flags are represented year-round outside the mayor's office, is where you can see them. But today, they will, hopefully now from the end of November, they will be out in the front hallway here being represented. And one of the things I'd just also like to thank James Moran and Gary Snow for putting up the teepee here today outside from the MHA Nation Tourism. And the other thing I have is everyone is invited to join next Monday on the 14th, Indigenous Peoples Day, for a free community-wide Indigenous Peoples Day meal and powwow, and that's going to be at the Moorhead High School. A few months ago, the city of Moorhead also passed a resolution to recognize that day as Indigenous Peoples Day. So we'd like to get together with them and support them as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. And just for the public, the flags are displayed upstairs on the 3rd floor at any time, and they have some of the history there as well. And we'll be looking forward to Indigenous Day in Moorhead next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve the order of agenda, moving item 30 to consent agenda to the regular agenda?
I so move. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the September 23rd, 2019 regular meeting?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
None opposed, motion carried. Consent agenda. There is a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 48, excluding item 30, which has been moved to the regular agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. Go to item 50, State Water Commission requests cost reimbursement for FM diversion flood project cost totaling A is $6,250 and B is $750,556.
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Is that for both?
Yep.
Yeah. Second.
Motion second. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Strand.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mahoney.
Aye. Ken, I should have had you say at least a couple of words, but
I waited for him to come all the way up.
you guys. Renaissance Zone project of the Great Plains Mercantile Holdings LLC for the new construction project located at 401 Broadway Avenue, 410 and 412 Fifth Street North, continuing from the 9/23 regular meeting. Explanation by Nicole Crutchfield.
There'll be a further explanation on this full details of the project later on the agenda, but regarding parking and construction. But the first step is coming in front of you tonight in front of the Renaissance Zone application for the Great Plains Mercantile Holdings. And pursuant to the application, the intent of the project is to transform the former Goodyear service station and surface parking lots into a 6-story, 115,000 square foot building with 370 structured parking stalls. This was approved unanimously by the Renaissance Zone Authority, and I know it's been continued a few times, but we do have those details ready for you tonight. And so with that, staff is recommending approval.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this Renaissance Zone project? Is there anybody who wishes to speak? If there's no public comment, I close the public hearing, and do I have a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Gary.
No.
Mahoney.
Aye. Item 2, Renaissance Zone Project for 201 Hospitality LLC for a rehab project located at 201 Fifth Street North, continued from the 9/23 regular meeting.
So
Nicole
this item,
Crutchfield as well.
yeah, so this item in front of you was approved by the Renaissance Zone Authority on August 28th. Pursuant to the application, the intent of this project is to complete extensive interior renovations. The rehabilitation will involve full renovation of all rooms, including new carpet, granite vinyl wall covering, and fitness room and public space. We'll have a remodel as well. The construction would begin this fall, and the investment includes nearly $6 million, which exceeds our minimum threshold. So with a renovation, there is a minimum threshold. The Renaissance Zone Authority did unanimously approve this project.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this Renaissance Zone project? Anybody who wishes to speak? If not, I close public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Move for approval?
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Gary.
No.
Mahoney.
Aye. Item C, continue to 11/18/19 zoning change for downtown mixed use with conditional overlay. Conditional overlay, Lot 1, Block 7, Harwood's First Edition, 701 University Drive North and 702 12th Street North. Approval recommended by Planning Commission, first reading of rezoning ordinance, but it's asked for any continuance. Can I have a motion?
So moved. Second. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Gary.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. Item D, zoning change from limited commercial to limited industrial on a portion of Lot 2, Block 1, Agassiz Nursery Edition, and approval recommended by Planning Commission on 9/3, first reading of the rezone. Donald Crest to explain.
Good evening, Commissioners. Donald Kress of the Department of Planning and Development. I'll be presenting the next 3 items. The first 2 items of zone changes include a zone change ordinance prepared by the City Attorney's Office. Also, Commissioners, you received a laydown item. This is actually for item 51F. We'll get to that a little later. So as the Mayor has stated here, item 51D is zoning change from LC Limited Commercial to LI Limited Industrial for the property at 4203 South University Drive. That's right here. Just a little location for you. This is the Rose Creek Golf Course, of course, and the river. And this property is, again, currently zoned limited commercial. It is owned by the same property owner to the south here, PKG Contracting. They're in their contracting business, and they have started to use this. They acquired this property, and again, you see the zoning here. That's the industrial zoning, the gray, and the pink is the commercial zoning. We're going to change the pink to the gray. The subject property has had the same owner as the adjacent lot to the south there, and is used by the same business. In 2009, PKG began to expand into this property, that is the subject property, and use it for outdoor storage. This zone change's purpose is to better match the existing use to the correct zone. And this is what the property looks like here. Out there, this is the subject property where they're having outdoor storage for a construction-related business. The applicant's representative is not able to be here with us tonight, unfortunately, so there is no one from that project here. The Planning Commission's recommendation is stated in your staff report and shown on the screen. That again, so.
Donald, did you put a bison bus there so you'd get Pipcorn's vote, or what?
Well, you just coincidentally, sir, that was out this morning, yes. There wasn't one there the first time, so I had to come back.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this zoning change? Anybody wants to speak? If not, I close public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded, Strand and Grinberg. Any discussion? Commissioner Gary.
Donald, did any of the neighbors say anything? With all this outdoor storage, this is a pretty visible place on University Drive, and there's homes and there's businesses, churches around that golf course. Does anyone say anything about the outdoor storage?
Yes, sir. No, we have not gotten anything on that. Let me just point something out to you, sir, that here, the rest of this is all park or city property, and then this property here, which is zoned currently single-family residential, is actually our next item to change that to public institutional. That is owned by the city of Fargo, and there was a house moved off there, and it was bought as a flood buyout property, so that's So that is a dike now, or a levee, and so there is not an immediate residence adjacent here.
Yeah, thank you.
And, yes, sir, thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Strand.
Yes.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. Zoning change from single dwelling residential to public institutional, Lot 1, Block 1, Agassiz Nursery Edition. Approval recommended by the Planning Commission and first reading of the rezoning. Donald Crest to explain as well.
Thank you, sir. As Commissioner Gehrig indicated there, this property is adjacent to the one we just looked at. These just happen to be side by side at the same time. They're not actually related. This is a city-owned property that was a flood buyout. It is currently zoned for a single dwelling residential, but there is no residence there. It is no longer able to be developed as a single family residence because it's a flood buyout. It's got a dike on it there. The property is right about here. This is the property we just looked at. The flood buyout property, the dike pretty much goes through it there. The applicant is the city of Fargo. City has reviewed this, reviewed with the city engineer and all other departments, and we have no further comments or concerns on changing this to PI. That's the appropriate zone for city-owned property that is a flood buyout. So Planning Commission's recommendation is stated in your staff report and shown on the screen to change this from single dwelling residential to PI, public institutional, as appropriate for a city-owned flood buyout lot. Thank you, Commissioners.
Is there anyone present wishing to speak to this zoning change? Anybody present to speak? If not, I'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Grinberg. Is there a second?
Second.
Gehrig, any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Strand.
Yes.
Pepcorn. Mahoney.
Aye. Item F, resolution regarding proposed correct plat of the Edge addition to the city of Fargo. Donald Crest to explain as well.
Commissioners, thank you. This is a correction of plat by resolution. We'll talk about that for a minute. This is the location of the property, University Drive here, Fifth Avenue here. As you go out here, you will see the Edge Artist Flats up there now. This is a slightly out-of-date photograph, but those are that recent construction right here on University Drive. We undertake this process of correction by plat very rarely. This process is not actually in the Land Development Code. It is provided for in the North Dakota Century Code, as cited in your memo there. This process does not require the plat to be corrected to go through the usual Planning Commission and City Commission process. It's just for correction of what you might say technical errors. Again, the plat we're concerned here is the Edge addition, which is where the Edge Artist Flats now. This evening's procedure is to hear any protests in regard to a resolution your commission adopted on the consent agenda at the September 9th, 2019 City Commission meeting. That was included in your packet for a reference for you. This is the item that the laydown item you got refers to, item 51F. If your commission votes to go forward and approve this correction, that would be the resolution that you would, the mayor would sign. At this time, staff has not received any protests regarding this process or this correction of the plat. The request for this process came from one of the property owner's representatives, Attorney Dan Boydie of the Boydie Law Firm. And Mayor, if I may, there's a technical background here that Mr. Boydie explains better than I do. So if I may ask Mr. Boydie to just step up for a minute and give you a little background. Thank you.
Dan, actually, you're the other.
Oh, he needs to use this one to use the.
Oh, because he's your friend now?
No, he has to use that. No, he has to use the mouse. He has to use the mouse on this one.
Mayor Mahoney, other commission members, apparently I'm deputized tonight. Actually, point of clarification, I'm here on behalf of DFI-AU, which owns the lot, this lot. This process, the applicant in this process is one of the Commonwealth entities that built the Edge project on this lot. And to say that this is a procedure that's not used very often would be probably the understatement of the evening. 29 years, I've never used this before and probably never will again. It's fascinating to exactly one person in this room, and that's the anal retentive real estate lawyer standing in front of you.
Yes.
Couple of unfortunate errors that occurred with the plat, and long story short, we went round and round with the title company and the buyer of the property, and could find no other better way to correct these two technical issues than to do this very seldomly used procedure that was probably created. Didn't look at the legislative history. It was probably 100+ years old. It happens to still remain in the subdivision ordinance. So That's why we're here before you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions in commission? Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Boydie. And again, Commissioners, the resolution that was handed out to you prior to the meeting was prepared by our city attorney's office and reviewed by the applicant there. So the recommendation from the staff here is to affirm the corrected plat of the edge addition by that resolution, with plat recordation contingent on the city engineer's final review and signing of the plat.
Is there any president wish to speak to this proposed plat correction? Anybody wishing to speak? Nobody wishing to speak? A closed public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Move to affirm as stated.
I'll second. Can you go back and show that slide? So back in the day, this used to be potentially a residential, it looks like residential lots. Is that correct? Like a long time ago? That's what it looked like that slide right there.
Right, yeah, this would be, I believe it's Reeves edition, sir.
So like, anyway.
Yeah, that's dating from some time ago. I believe there was a lumber yard here at one time, back in the 50s and 60s too, I think, was on that site.
You weren't here then, were you, Don?
I was very small, sir.
That whole area west of University Drive was sort of a combination residential area and industrial park at the same time before we had a formal industrial park. So you have a lot of mixed uses in that area.
Could be some coins there, huh? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gary.
Yes.
Strand. Mahoney.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Recommendation from Forestry Department to preserve 2 elm trees on 11th Street North. Scott Ludow to explain. This is an interesting one.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you very much. What I'd like to do is go through just a brief presentation, hit some of my talking points, and at the end, open it up for some discussion and questions from the Commission. My role is simply advocate for tree preservation when possible. The last 2 to 3 years, we've seen an increase in large tree removals due to some of the redevelopments that have been occurring in certain locations. And along with tree removals, there is some public comments, typically afterwards. A lot of redevelopments, when they come in, they're already set. A plan is in place, and these are already set to happen. And there will be some similar projects like this in the future as we move ahead. This picture is actually 12th Woodrow Wilson, 12th Street North, looking north from 3rd Street. There used to be trees on the east side, or on the west side of 12th Street, that were removed as part of the project. And in this case, there was an appraisal done, and compensation was received for the value of those assets. What you see in purple is the downtown mixed-use zoning. In this case, they are allowed to build to the property line. And a lot of times, large mature trees infringe and encroach into that area well outside of the right-of-way. At that point, there become some options. One, we can look at, are there ways to preserve the trees and still accommodate the project? Or is it best just to simply accept the appraised value and take compensation for the value of those trees? Sometimes pruning can be done as part of the compromise when we're looking at these projects, when working with the developers. Right now, there's a big need to try to focus on how do we get more public participation and input in on these tree removals, really ahead of the game versus afterwards when the negative comments are coming in. The current Mosaic apartment complex proposed, 312 11th Street North, it's a 92-unit, 5-story complex. Right now, it's zoned DMU, along with other properties in the area. Previously, this was residential, so it has developed as a residential area with a heavy population of street trees. A photograph looking north of the 2 elms. 2 of these elms on 11th Street are in fairly good condition and could be considered candidates during the compromise process for keeping in place. How do we do that? The one on 3rd Avenue, and I mentioned when possible tree preservation, this one right here on 3rd Avenue, simply not a good candidate. it varies from site to site, species to species. And so what you see here is a value that was placed through the appraisal process, which is actually a industry standard for appraising the value of large mature trees that are too large to be transplanted and coming up with a value. Some thoughts and considerations from this point on, and I want to ask you this. One, I've got three of them. One, if we aren't able to compromise on this plan and try to make some accommodations, then simply let's move forward and accept the appraised value as compensation for the trees, because it is a public asset and they do have value. Two, ask the city attorney to look at our current ordinance. Is there some things that we can do to accommodate and adjust with these changes as these developments are starting to come into place? It needs to be updated, and there can be some more teeth added to it if we choose to do so. That would also include some type of public comment process with those changes to the ordinance. And then three, let's look at the DMU zoning. Are there opportunities to look at pro-tree changes to that? I don't know yet, but those are some things that I'd like to throw out, at least for discussion and some thoughts and consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions as best I can.
Mr. Gregg.
When you give the appraisal of the value of the trees, is there usually pushback from the developers? I don't know if we have developers here, but is there usually pushback, or they pay it, or?
Typically the second. There is no pushback, and they will pay it.
And where do those funds go? To your department, or?
They will either go, they're made out to the city of Fargo, and either the general fund or they'll go back into the forestry revenue account, which we use for other tree planting projects.
I'd like to see it go back to your department, I guess. If there's any changes to be made that you're talking about, I'd like to see it go there. My thoughts.
I think typically it has gone back to your department, hasn't it, Scott? You're expected to replant trees with the funding you get. How many trees do you plant a year?
A little over 1,100.
1,100. Does anybody in the public want to speak? The developer want to speak to this? Can you modify your plans? Can you save the trees? You can put them in the middle of a living room? What can you do?
Austin Morris, Enclave Development. So it's been enjoyable to work with Scott and the city staff on this. We've had quite a back and forth related to tree preservation and as it relates to this project, and then probably a broader discussion on how it impacts long-term development in the downtown area. So when we purchased the property and we began designing the project, and Scott maybe can speak to this, based on past projects and past policy, we haven't had to consider density in DMU zoning as it relates to how much land we're able to build on within a block or a few lots that we're purchasing. We have gone into these projects knowing that we will be required to replace the trees, we will be required to plant more trees, and we may be assessed based on Scott's and their department's appraisal methodology, the fees associated with having to remove trees. And I think based on that, in this case, the southern tree, southwestern tree is not savable. The eastern trees aren't savable in our engineer's opinion based on how much canopy we'd have to remove, because we'd be removing in excess of 30% of the tree's canopy where it impacts the property. But I am I agree with Scott on discussing further how do we handle this in the DMU zoning, and it is part of downtown density is going to change what was there and the existing or past, past tree planning as it relates to zoning for single-family residential versus zoning for 4 to 5 story mixed-use communities. So I think that's a great discussion to have long-term, especially in the DMU zoning areas, because we will be putting more trees in, we will be installing additional trees, and if there's a way we can work with forestry to figure out what is the best plan going forward here and elsewhere. But in this case, our project looking back based on past tree appraisals and what we've learned to be the norm as far as paying the fees and moving forward. This project we have designed completed and are ready to start digging. So that's the challenge, is we can't really adjust that easily right now, so.
According to present rules, you have a right to do this, right? You can't save the trees, and your design process does go to the edge, so according to present, we can look at going forward in the future, what we need to do in this, but to Scott's concern, if we want to change something, but theoretically right now, you have followed all the rules, you would be allowed to proceed with your project, but you would have to take the trees.
Yes, that's my understanding.
So does that, Mr. Chairman, does that require us any action tonight? Because there's a
We would have to vote to save the trees.
Mr. Chair?
Or vote to allow for the bid analysis to go forward in the tree removal. That would be the other option. That's what we looked at PUPEC. We talked a lot about it. We had two options on the table, and kind of laid it out there on this last slide from options is preserve and protect, which right now we really don't have the ordinance to stand behind that, or move forward with the tree removal and appraisal values paid. And that's what we were kind of looking at. We wanted the platform to get up to make sure that this is publicly known after what we went through on Robert Street and stuff like that. So as these projects grow and they're moving towards into other areas that were once residential, we're going to see more and more of this. DMU has been pretty specifically focused around a lot of the downtown, which didn't have a lot of trees, but as you move west, we're going to see more and more of this.
Commissioner
Commissioner Greenberg, I think we could vote to stop the construction based on the trees, right? I think what they're saying is we could try that, but we don't have a good policy or law to back that up, right? So I think we're taking this vote proactively to say, continue with your project. We're not going to stop you because of the trees. They're going to compensate us for it, and we'll let them carry forward, if that's the vote.
So we made a recommendation coming out of PUPEC. We're asking commission to weigh in on this and maybe vary from what PUPEC.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that.
No, my turn.
Commissioner Pipcorn.
So, first of all, the forestry department is awesome. So thank you, Scott, for all you do. And I find it very ironic that the picture you have of the tree on the boulevard has been butchered by our utility companies. So I'd like to know how much we're going to start charging them for all the damage they inflict on all of our trees. And this is my editorial comment. Trees are a precious commodity in North Dakota, and actually it's part of our history. Back in the day, if you were going to be a farmer in western North Dakota, it was called a tree claim. And if you planted trees and stayed there a certain amount of time, that land was yours. And so it's a very important thing. And so I'm very much supportive of, we have to have a policy for all this. And I think what we need to do is have developers, Scott, our forestry department has to be in charge of telling them what goes there. If you're taking something out, then, because the other thing is you have to have a mix of trees. That's part of his expertise. So it might seem kind of, I'm telling you, man, trees are very precious to me. When I'm driving by, man, if I see dead trees, that makes me unhappy. And when I see the utility companies hacking trees in North Fargo, it takes all I can do to not get out of the car and give that guy a piece of my mind. So once again, this is a great thing, but we have to have a policy for this for the future, because I'm telling you, North Dakota, trees, it's a big deal. So thank you for all your work, Scott, and that is the end of my sermon for today.
Austin, how many trees are going to be replaced for the loss of these two?
That's a great question.
As many as
Ryan?
Dave wants.
What?
I think we told Scott we'll work with him on what he recommends.
Whatever Scott wants.
Whatever Dave
Figure
wants.
it. Mr. Chair, but this goes back to we have to have a policy. I mean, for these blocks, especially urban, you got to have a plan, and that's why we need a forestry department to make sure they follow the plans, because I think that's very important.
Let me make a comment.
You want to say, Commissioner Grinberg? Everybody wants to comment on trees.
Knowing that we're all tree huggers tonight, that's a good thing. I agree with Commissioner Pepcorn. And I also understand there was some confusion early on when you started this project about what was allowed and what was not. So clearly, it's time to move on for this project. But I think the concern and the things that have dusted up over the years about trees is more than just downtown. It was the project, the flood protection project at Lindenwood. Those were conscious decisions made that could have been made differently. And even in South Fargo, trees are just whacked out for no particular planning as far as overall integrity. And so I think the your point number 2, Scott, is we need a policy for the entire city, not just, I mean, downtown's important, but the rest of the city's big trees are too.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question and then a comment. Does our downtown strategic plan address this? Maybe Nicole would know. And to what degree will we include these discussions into our core neighborhood plans going forward? If you could just quickly address that. And what does the policy say, or the plan?
Oh. So in terms of our long-range planning for core neighborhood plan, Go 2030, and our downtown and focus plan, very much talks about the importance of trees, landscaping, beautification, all of those things. But until you have ordinances in place to kind of mandate these things, it's just really staff's word against the vision and dream. So we work very closely with Scott during our platting process and site plan process, which is where this project came to light. But I think more specifics related to Scott's ordinances and policies would be helpful.
The current ordinance, Commissioner, really just calls out the need for a permit if there's going to be construction activities or removal or any public tree work done near public trees. And then if there is a violation of the ordinance, it's strictly a misdemeanor, which is a small amount. And so my second comment about, okay, re-looking at this current ordinance, adding something to it as we try to adapt and adjust to these changes that are starting to occur with developments. That is a need right there.
So,
Commissioner Strand?
So if I might continue, we may figure out how to breathe life into those actions rather than just acknowledge that the policies are lacking. So however we would do that. Now here's my other question going on another direction. We've had 2 instances where we're doing, like the 10th Street North project, if I recall, where I want to say citizen Christine Johnson, I believe, reached out to us, and we were in the process of removing 10 or 11 trees, and we were well down the path of those trees not likely being saved. And it was a state highway project. Why don't we use this same criteria and the same approaches for projects like that and identify the trees in advance, put values on them in advance, see if there's a discussion potential to save them. In that instance, it took a citizen to bring it to our attention after the fact, and I commend her, and I hope I didn't get her name wrong, but she saved a couple, your department did. Well, why don't we do this more often and put the same focus on the other trees with other projects?
I think there is opportunities for that, and you're spot on with Christine Johnson. From that, there's been a smaller group developed to talk about how we can maybe change or increase the value of our current ordinance. So that will happen, and I think it can spill over from a state project, city project, simply as far as the notification and letting folks know what's happening. There is opportunity there.
Commissioner Strand, I think that's what we got from you the last time when we went through the Roberts Street tree removals, is we needed a change. And this is how our first step forward. Scott and I have been talking about it. How do we take that step forward? And this is our first step forward in making that change and bringing the public to notice on this stuff. And then take it through the ordinance factor and get things changed.
Thank you.
Sure, Greg.
Like Dave and John, I'm a proud north sider myself. When you talk about the DMU and other areas where downtown where you can build directly to the property lines there, you're going to have this loggerhead of, do you preserve the trees or do you want more dense infill with the larger buildings, right? Because you could have those apartments that don't go directly to that line and keep the trees, or you could allow the larger developments like we've been approving in this area. So that's an interesting discussion that I'm looking forward to having too. For this one, I'll move to remove the 3 trees and accept payment for those trees.
Is there a second? Is there a second discussion? Austin, could I ask you a question? If they voted to save the trees, would that stop construction at this point? Would you have to go back to the drawing boards? I mean, you've got everything ready to go.
Well, the challenge would be we wouldn't be able to move forward with the development if that were the case, as far as redesigning and spending another $250,000 in architectural and civil and structural and going back to the drawing board would be, impossible to make work. We'd be reducing the number of units, number of parking stalls, and a lot of things that would make it impossible, but, yeah, so.
All I want to know, thank you. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Gary.
Yes.
Pepcorn. Greenberg.
Aye.
Strand. Mahoney.
Aye, thank you. Item 53, applications for property tax exemption and improvements made to buildings. You have the list. Do I have is Ben here? No.
Move for approval.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? We continue to have people take tax exemption to improve their buildings. I encourage anybody who wants to do any of that to do it. Roll call vote.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gary.
Yes.
Strand. Mahoney.
Aye.
Point of order.
Mr. Grimmer.
Before I forget, Scott, what's the plan for an ordinance, or do you need a motion to set in motion a time frame to come back with recommendations, or?
I think you could make a motion to do a study on that.
I think that's what was requested. If we do nothing, then it's not clear what we're doing. So do you have a recommended motion of a timeline to come back with a recommendations on ordinance changes?
Yeah, the suggestion would be to work with city attorney's office to amend our current ordinance to reflect a more pro-tree preservation aspect. And I would say it's going to be probably springtime next year.
March 1st?
Yep,
Make that motion.
I would go with that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, Gary.
Who's working with the attorney? Is it you?
I would initially.
I think it'd be Scott and Ben, and it'd be Nicole. Have to be
Do they have
planning as well.
Do they have a direction? Are we going to limit the DMU? Smaller apartment complexes downtown?
I think, at least from my perspective, they have a green light to come back with the entire city and evaluate.
Yeah, I think that's part of the discussion as well. Can we look at that?
Okay. I think it'd be more than just downtown, so, in my opinion.
So basically, the commission would empower Scott to bring the people together he needs to bring together to bring back an ordinance that's reasonable. That'd be planning and forestry, Ben Val, those two, right? Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Commissioner Grinberg. That's a good motion. And something I've noticed in some meetings I've attended to is there are cities, and I'm not going to come up with the words, but there are canopy cities, or do you know the word, Scott, that I'm looking for? Cities that celebrate their trees and they have acknowledgement of the canopy status. Do you know what that is, and do we do anything like that here?
They are looking at canopy coverage.
Coverage.
And there's a goal set for that community to reach a certain canopy coverage, 50%, 60%, whatever that is. We haven't done a canopy study yet. I'm not sure where we are, but many communities have already taken that step and set aside some goals to try to shoot for, increasing that canopy.
I move we amend the motion to also include a study and potential recommendations for canopy coverage policies for the city.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Grinberg, do you accept that as an amendment?
Sure, I'm still wondering what really canopy means, so study it.
Essentially, how much space does the canopy occupy in your community?
It's the North Fargo we have with all this canopy of trees, basically. So a roll call vote on the amendment.
Strand.
Yes.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gary.
Yes.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Mahoney.
Aye. And roll call vote on the first motion to do the
Grinberg.
study.
Aye.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Gary. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mahoney.
Mahoney. Aye. And Tony didn't vote twice. You only got one vote on that.
Oh, did you? Okay. Under the canopy then.
Yeah, you're under the canopy. Item 54, recommendation for incentive option on Main Avenue Restructuring Project Improvement District BR 19A1. This is going to be Brenda Daring explaining, and some pictures.
Good evening. I wanted to visit with you a little bit earlier. In the agenda, we created the Main Avenue project. And as part of creating the Main Avenue project, we'd like to add an incentive. I want to go back and talk about how successful our incentive was this year. We did have an incentive between 4th Street and Broadway. They could be allowed up to 30 days of incentive at $10,000 a day. And the section between 4th Street and Broadway, they were able to get 29 of those 30 days. And then 2nd Street and Main Avenue, it is slated to be open this week. And if it's open this week, they will get the full incentive of that intersection also at $200,000. This is just a quick layout of our phasing for next year. The project will go from just west of Broadway all the way through the the University Drive intersection of Main Avenue, and it will be in 4 phases. So the estimated project cost is 13.6 million about, and it's got multiple funding areas. We've got the federal highway, the state highway, we've got some water utility funds, the wastewater, we've got some sales tax, park district funds, and then the special assessments. Today we are asking to do another incentive on the second phase of the project. We're asking for $500,000, the same as this year's project. We've reviewed the different phases, and our recommendation is for an incentive between Broadway and 8th Street to get the other railroad crossing open as soon as possible. And so we have a $500,000 a day for a maximum of 20 days, 100,000, and then an overall completion of 40 days at $10,000 a day, which would be an incentive about 400,000. And so we're asking for a maximum incentive of 500,000 for the project. As the motion, and
Questions
I'd
of the
answer
commission?
any questions.
I move to not call it an incentive.
Not do the incentive?
No, not call it an incentive, call it a bonus instead. I'll move to approve the bonus.
Is there a second?
I'll second it, and just a quick comment, this is money well spent, especially on Main Avenue. There's a lot of small businesses, and the sooner they get the construction done, it reduces the impact to all the businesses, and so it's a great thing, and it was awesome what happened this year, and so it's a good precedent, even though Tony doesn't like to call it a
Jeremy
bonus.
Gordon being running around that roundabout we have, will he run around the first day just so we see him and say hi? Commissioner
He spent
Strand.
some time out there today.
2 lanes out there.
Thank you, Mayor. Brenda, I'm going to assume this, but I'll ask it just so I've said it. Do incentives in any way, shape, or form compromise worker safety, or do we always keep a vigilant eye on safety measures in the workplace so that so we're never incenting them to speed up and put anybody at risk?
Correct. We are never asking them to do anything that would put anyone at risk. We really diligently look at what is the appropriate timing for each of those sections. And then we look at, okay, what could, maybe if they work 6 or 7 days a week, they can get it done faster, or if they put a couple of crews on it. So we never wanted to compromise any safety, and especially in these areas where we have the pedestrians so close to the construction activity.
Thank you.
Roll call vote, please.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. You have any recommendations for the planning commission? Actually, Austin's in the room as well. Parking commission, I'm sorry, parking commission. Thank you, Don. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Strand? Pepcorn? Mahoney?
Aye. We'll take a 5-minute break, come back at 6:05 and go on to item 56. Thank you. Call the meeting back to order. We're going to go to item 56, the Mercantile Project. It's agreement with the Walker Consultants for parking consulting services, development agreement with Great Plains Mercantile Holding, direct staff to prepare a development agreement with Tom Smith for the owner-occupied housing units, preliminary resolution approving the financing of the Mercantile Project, and the issuance of bonds and Mercantile Development Agreement. Jim Gilmore to explain.
Thank you. We've been working over the last 6 months on this Mercantile project. It'd be another public-private partnership in the downtown. We've been working closely with the two property owners to the north, both Great Northern Cycles and Bison Apartments, and we put together a development agreement for your consideration tonight. There was a small change, and I think Eric has passed that out, just an edit in the parking agreements. We've really been working on adding parking in the downtown since 2015. That's when 2 renewal plans were approved for both the Roberts Commons parking garage as well as the Mercantile parking garage. We had identified sites where mixed-use developments would be appropriate and worked on public-private partnerships for both of these sites. I think the Roberts project has been a success. We have 454 parking spaces there. There's commercial on the main floor. There's approximately 160 housing units. We've seen $30 million in private investment. And the Kessler project, which will be located to the south of Roberts Commons, hopefully will be under construction this fall with a completion in 2021. As we look at parking needs downtown, we have almost 100 people on the waiting list for either Roberts or the Civic ramp. We've seen the Block 9 parking ramp open. There's 135 people that are parking in there on a temporary basis until RDO moves into the downtown. There's been expanding businesses downtown, new businesses downtown, as well as a need for more short-term parking. The people would be using this facility or expanded parking downtown include companies large and small. These are some of the ones that have either expressed interest to us or they're temporarily parking in the Block 9 garage or they're on our waiting list. So, I think this fits with the In Focus plan quite well. That plan called for mixed use on Broadway and 4th Avenue, and this does that with housing above main floor commercial. The In Focus parking study identified the fact that parking north of 2nd Avenue was where there was going to be a growing need. We believe this mixed use development is a high quality design. It brings new housing to the downtown. I think it also helps sustain some affordable housing. The Bison Apartments would be parking here. There are other upper floor apartments in the downtown where people are looking for a place to park, as well as other small apartment buildings downtown that don't have their own parking. So the Mercantile project, what it is there'd be, at this point, it looks like it'd be 369 parking spaces that would be owned by the city. There would be commercial development of 15,000 square feet. Approximately 100 apartments, and then to the north there'd be 9 units of owner-occupied housing. We really have 2 developers on this project. We have Great Plains Mercantile that will be developing the wrap on the south and the west of the project, and then Tom Smith is developing the owner-occupied housing to the northeast. He's the owner of the Great Northern Depot where the Great Northern Cyclery is. We've also identified the need or looked at the need for the city to lease some space downtown. As you know, the police department is moving out to new headquarters, and so one way they can maintain a downtown presence is to lease space along 4th Avenue. Eventually we'll need more a parking office. And there's also been interest in providing some public restrooms in the downtown. So within this development agreement, there's an opportunity for the city, or actually the developers agreed to lease parking or space to the city along 4th Avenue. That would be east of the current alley. There's a lease rate in there. That would be available as the wrap is constructed following completion of the parking ramp or garage. This shows the layout of the project. The city parking would be here, this parking facility. Again, Mr. Smith would be providing some future townhomes or condos, some type of owner-occupied housing. To the north, there'd be this mixed-use building, main floor commercial and apartments above. This is a little hard to read all the detail here, but it shows in this first floor plan, this space along here would be where the city could lease space for police parking. We're also, the Downtown Community Partnership has been thinking about having different space a little closer to downtown so they could maybe be a partner in that. The second through the sixth floor would be apartments, housing. And again, Mr. Smith's development would be up here on the northeast corner. This is a perspective of the proposed owner-occupied housing. You can kind of see in the corner here the roof of the current Great Northern Depot. So it's a very kind of attractive design. One of the things we were concerned with this development is to have sort of a buffer between a parking garage and that depot and Mr. Smith's business. This is just elevation of Great Plains Mercantile. What that would look like. We have, if you want to see some other details, I believe Mr. Allmendinger has some other slides that we could go back to on the project you just approved, the Renaissance Zone application. The mercantile costs, what this will be is the city would have an agreement with Great Plains Mercantile. They would build the facility for a maximum cost, including the land, of $12.25 million. They would actually have to document all their costs. This is an agreement almost exactly like we had with Roberts Commons. We would pay up to a maximum of that. So if it costs more, we still pay this. If it costs less, we would pay less money. There's some money in the budget for city-controlled costs. As part of this agreement, there's a couple different contingencies. One is if we start to find underground tanks or poor soils, Great Plains Mercantile would pay the first 100% or the first $100,000 at 100%, so that if it's below 100,000, we wouldn't have any extra costs. Above that, we would be paying 40% of the costs, up to a maximum of $235,000. Which would also be a contingency if there's poor weather that's required. Some of the costs we're not 100% sure of right now is need to work with engineering. There'll be some Fifth Street improvement costs. Those have not been fully designed to kind of pull the sidewalk out on the Fifth Street, to add some landscaping in that area. So we'll work with engineering on that. The preliminary estimate's $115,000. So that contingency is going to be determined by the city in terms of how much and what goes into that design. So that could be more or less. We'll have some property taxes and specials during construction. We hire Walker Consultants to monitor this project for the city and make sure we get a good quality parking facility. They'd be under contract with us for $53,000. And then I work with our Information Services Department for fiber connection as well as a recorder at that site. As far as the lease costs for the city space, that's something that we believe is $22 a square foot, and that would have to be included in the 2021 city budget. How do we, so we would borrow $13 million for this facility. That's our top end of the budget. And so the mercantile revenue, in order to pay off those bonds, really it comes all from the, like I said, downtown, people that park downtown or have property downtown. We'd have revenue from the mercantile parking facility. Rates will have to be increased at other parking facilities. We have tax increment financing available from 2 TIF districts that are already in place. And then we would sell the city-owned parking lot, which is a parking authority asset, on the corner of Main Avenue and Broadway. We have had some interest in developing the site, mixed-use development on the site. I've been in touch with a local architectural firm who's working with some investors out of Duluth that are interested in acquiring the site. And so we don't know how soon this will happen, but certainly we could, I think, get sufficient money from the site to help pay these bonds until the TIF revenue comes in a little bit later. There's a series of recommendations we have here, but I also want to stress that we'll need to do some things to follow up the actions needed to move this project ahead. One is we would approve an agreement with Walker Consulting to monitor the project for the city. That would include them completing a review of the plans to make sure we are actually comfortable with the design prior to the mayor signing that agreement. We think that'll take a couple weeks, but we want to make sure that we get a good quality facility. Secondly, would be to actually authorize the mayor to sign that development agreement with Great Plains, subject to review by Walker Consulting. Secondly, we have not yet developed the final development agreement with, or third, we have not developed the final development agreement with Tom Smith, and so we would need to have direction to the city attorney to work on that with Mr. Smith, to work on the final details on that. Sort of have a real short term sheet that's attached in terms of where he would have access to parking within the facility and cooperate with us on that. And then finally, fourth would be to approve a resolution on project financing. I want to stress that when we, in approving this development agreement, you'll need to move forward in the future on really four factors. One is to approve the actual sale of $11 million in bonds for the project. Two, a loan of $2 million from Research Park Ventures. Third, increase parking rates downtown by about 243,000 a year. That could be some 20% increases in some, and others lower. It's around 12.5% increase in existing parking rates, and then sell the Main Avenue parking lot at Broadway and Main Avenue. So while you're not taking action on these tonight, these become essential to do as follow-up items. So the Finance Committee has looked at this and recommends approval. Be happy to answer any questions that you have. I think I've covered most of it, but do you have any questions at this point?
Commissioners. Commissioner Garrett.
The Roberts ramp does not fund itself, correct? It goes in debt every year? Funding comes from other places besides the TIF, besides the cost, the income would come.
The parking fund, the entire authority pays for itself each year. That specific facility has about $700,000 a year in debt. I believe our net operating income is in the $400,000 range. I'd have to look at that.
Somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000 it loses every year. This ramp would operate similarly, correct?
Although that's offset by other parking facilities.
Understood. I understand we're not in debt, but the ramp does not fund itself, is my point. My second point is this ramp will be the same, correct? It'll have to be funded by other things besides how much it takes in.
It'll be funded by parking funds and TIF revenue, the same as Roberts.
Above and beyond what it takes in. I mean, you know my point. You know what I'm trying to say here. Okay. So again, we're putting the people of Fargo into debt for these things that will never pay themselves off, even though we have a TIF, even though we have parking revenue coming in. So the more ramps we put up, the more money the people lose. That's why I want to be aware of that. So now we're going to be $500,000, anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 in debt by just these two ramps we're putting in. If those companies that you listed, that big list of companies, want parking, build it. Nothing's stopping you. You guys put that in. It's not up to the residents of Fargo to pay for your parking. If Walmart wants parking, Walmart builds parking. If Happy Joe's wants parking, Happy Joe's builds parking. It's from the bottom to the top. But for some reason, because it's downtown, we're supposed to foot the bill. And that's not okay with me. So we need to end this process.
The history of parking authorities is they were created because each business, in order to maintain a downtown, could not go and build, I need 3 spaces, I need to build 4 spaces, I need to build 5. And so they pooled their resource together and built parking facilities that would benefit the entire downtown. So Some companies might be large enough to build a parking facility. If you look at most of the people on this list, they don't have those kind of resources.
Commissioner Pipcorn?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just wanted to talk, so the Roberts Commons, it's a phenomenal success. I mean, anybody that goes there would be able to tell that, and I'll just give you a couple of numbers. The property taxes for the Roberts Commons in 2015 was $2,412.36. That's how much they paid. Once the all the deferred things go off, they'll be paying almost $500,000 a year in property taxes. And so our downtown is unique and phenomenal and successful, and we have to have parking. That's part of economic development. You have to have parking. Otherwise these businesses are not going to come downtown. So it's a great thing. The Roberts Commons is a phenomenal success. The parking, I'm the liaison with the Parking Commission, and the Roberts Commons was our first target. The next target is Mercantile, and then we'll have a couple more after that. And that you have to have parking if you want customers to come downtown. The downtown Fargo, it's unique. Our competitors don't have a downtown. A couple of our neighbors, we are the downtown for this region, and that's a great thing. And you have to continue to invest in the downtown, and if you don't, you're going to lose. Thank you.
Commissioner Gary?
I'll be 61 years old when they start paying taxes. 61. A lot of us won't be around. Looking at you, Jim. No, I'm kidding. But I'm just saying, in 25 years, that's a bad ROI. If I told you to give me $14 million, and in 25 years, I'll give you $1 million every year until you die, you'd say, I'm gonna do something else. I'm gonna invest somewhere else. And that's what we're telling people at Fargo to do. So what we're also assuming is that nothing will be built in these places without incentives. I've had people come in, person after person after person. Would you build without the incentive? What we get a lot is, yes, I would, or I would build something smaller in that place. Without the DMU, I wouldn't be right up against the property lines. I wouldn't do such a great program, or such a great project, but something would be there, paying taxes in the long term. And that's what we want. Market-based, sustainable businesses that will be here forever, instead of incentives-driven growth, that if incentives get pulled away at some point, which they're gonna have to be, by the way, it's the way of the world, the market will crash. So we're building up way bigger than we need to be. We're getting an ROI of 25, 26, 40 years in the case of the Island Park ramp, and we're calling that a great success. That's confusing to me.
Do I have a motion?
Jim, may I, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Grimberg?
Are you looking for the 4 items in a motion?
Yes.
I'd make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Strand?
Thank you, Mayor. Jim, help me understand where the concept of increasing parking costs for others, $250,000 a year, where does that come from and how does that fly? I just don't understand how we're gonna penalize existing people who are already downtown parking with a 12.5% to 20% increase to fund this new parking ramp they probably may not even be using.
Well, first of all, I think the philosophy is that to a large extent, we want to have the parking authority pay for itself. So there's no general fund appropriation to parking. And so we're trying to keep it that way. I've been working with Kent on that so that we don't have to use a general fund. So therefore, if you want more parking downtown, you have to pay more. And I think in talking to businesses downtown, a lot of them, would you like low-cost parking, but you can't get any because there's none available, or are you willing to pay so there's a larger amount of parking, but you can actually rent a space? So you want parking to be at $106 a month, but you can't have any, or would you rather it be $129, but we actually have a spot available for you? So the rates too, we're looking at setting them up so the most popular places to park are Roberts Commons and the Civic Ramp. So what we're going to be suggesting is that those go up to $129 a month. If you want to pay less, you go out a little bit further to the less, so you have to walk a couple blocks, you're paying $106. If you don't mind walking even further, you can rent at Island Park for $60. So you set your rates based on kind of supply and demand.
My next question, how about people who say to you today, any of you who are building, and I'm in favor of this project generally speaking, okay, but I'm going to ask my questions. And what about people who say anybody who's out there building parking ramps today isn't looking far enough into the future because they're going to be obsolete sooner than we think? With ride shares and with the changing technologies and transportation options. I mean, there are people who say this, do not build any parking ramps. I'm curious our answer to that.
Yeah, I think we've seen the parking demand continue to grow. I think the amount of parking per square foot of housing may be less in the future. One of the things that we're incorporating in this is though the residential housing units, and I don't see that people will completely not be able to own a car, not everyone, and so we're thinking about that. Also, if their car demand does diminish, then these surface lots would be the first to develop. So 25 years from now, will it be harder to rent spots? By then we'll have it paid for. So I just think there's always going to be that individual car ownership, whether it's remote. You're still going to have these individual vehicles. You're going to need to put them someplace at night and someplace during the day while people are working. So I see the surface parking maybe going away, but not structured parking.
If I might continue. How do we know that future commissions will buy into the increased parking rates? And if they don't, will that put this project at risk? And how do we also know that future commissions will be in favor of selling that asset at Broadway and Main Avenue to dedicate the funds for this particular project and not another project?
I anticipate all of those actions taking place in the next 6 months while you're all still seated.
And would either or any of these, such as those two, jeopardize the project if, say, a commission decided, well, because we have other assets that we could sell too, several. The one Broadway, where the Park East projects used to be, where the police station is now, where the public health building is over here. So we have a list of assets, but I'm not so convinced that future commissioners are going to buy in or not right now. And will this project be safe if the future commission didn't agree to those terms?
I mean, if this commission does not sell that parking lot, within the next year, then yes, you'd need to find some other source to make those annual bond payments, or you'll go into debt for a while until you come out of the debt. There's going to be a recommendation from the parking commission on rates. We'll be suggesting that you approve that. Again, once the parking commission is able to review those specific rates.
But Jim, that actually, the parking rate change would be within the next month to 60 days, because basically it has to go to the parking commission, John, to your question. The sale of the land is a different question, and we sometimes have those issues, is where do you find the funding? The assumption is with Jim is he's working with a pretty viable buyer, but it could be like the park board. You may not get the money you want to get out of that piece of land, and you want more. So we would have to address that. I think Jim's bringing a lot in the 4 different areas, but there is some assumptions that it'll work. So you are correct. We're making a commitment as a commission to this project.
And you'll need to sell the bonds, in the next several months in order to start paying the bills.
Any other questions, Commissioner Stern? You're having that thoughtful mode right now.
Well, I'm just, in my head, this concept of assuring the financing is needed for the project, of course, but we've got some question marks in there. I would suggest that I'm not likely inclined to think that I'll easily support the parking increases for everybody. So that's going to put a quarter million in jeopardy from one perspective. I'm not so sure I'd be convinced or not about selling the asset or other assets or not. So maybe what you do is the developers have explore other financing avenues that could adjunct this in case we have some political bumps in the road with the recommendations you're suggesting now.
I guess as far as sale of the lot, I should note that lot is probably underutilized right now. I think we have about 70 some spots and there are only 60 rented. We have spots available in the Island Park ramp across the street, so it's an asset of the parking authority that could be sold. I guess if we decide not to do these things at that time, you're going to need to really be adopting another alternative to finance those. But I think it's important we move forward on these tonight in order to, I should mention the timeline. We'd like to get this agreement approved tonight, break ground in November, and be open in September of next year.
Any other discussion? Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we know yet their intentions for pilots or other incentive requests coming down the road?
Yes, we do. You approved the Renaissance Zone, 5-year Renaissance Zone exemption. Within the developers agreement, they're not allowed to apply for a pilot and they're not allowed to apply for any tax increment financing. So we've taken those two things off the table. The incentive will strictly be limited to the Renaissance Zone. There is a TIF district, but that TIF district is coming to the city to pay for our bonding costs.
Better thing about this one versus the roll call is that the parking lot is bid one price. That's it. That's all it costs us. There's no additional pricing on that, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn. Gehrig.
No.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Yes. Last item, item 30, grant from Luther Social Services, North Dakota, doing TB nurse case management and interpretation for the new refugees for 2020. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Strand.
Yes.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Nope.
Mahoney.
Aye. Any other business of the group? Thank you. Good meeting, good discussion. We are adjourned.